Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission, as always, is simple. Cut through the noise, stack up the sources, and pull out those key nuggets of knowledge to get you properly informed, fast. Today, we're starting with a thought that really hits home in our fast-changing world. It's from Charles Darwin. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. And that idea of adaptation. It's the perfect lead-in for today's discussion because, honestly, the global landscape is shifting incredibly quickly. Speaking of adapting and leading, our focus today is Denmark. As of July 1st, 2025, they've taken over the 6-month rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union. They're taking the reins from Poland. Now, this isn't their first time in the chair, far from it. It's actually Denmark's 8th presidency, the last one being way back in 2012.
That's right. And, for anyone tracking global dynamics, especially if you're a UPSC aspirant or just keen on current affairs and international relations, this deep dive is, well, pretty crucial. We're basing our analysis today on a really thorough piece published by ORF, the Observer Research Foundation. That's a top Indian strategic think tank. So the insights here could be really valuable for mains exams, prelims, or even just your general knowledge base. Our goal here is to unpack Denmark's really ambitious agenda. We'll look at how it compares to Poland's time leading and really dig into their motto, a strong Europe in a changing world. We want to extract the core insights for you, what Denmark wants to achieve, why it actually matters, and crucially, the hurdles they might face.
Okay, let's get into that vision then. Looking at Denmark's overall plan for these 6 months, it seems to boil down to 3 main pillars: security, competitiveness, and decarbonization. These feel very current, don't they? Not just jargon.
Not at all. They're incredibly relevant pillars and, frankly, quite necessary given the economic and geopolitical uncertainty we're seeing everywhere right now. And what's interesting is Denmark isn't doing this alone. They're part of the current presidency trio, working closely with Poland, who just finished, and Cyprus, who's up next. This teamwork is pretty key for setting the EU's strategic direction over, say, 18 months, not just 6. It points towards a more joined-up approach for the EU's future.
Right. So let's zoom in on that first pillar, security. It sounds like Denmark is really carrying forward the momentum from Poland on defense matters. But what's the specific Danish angle here? What's their strategic thinking on bolstering defense?
Well, Denmark's focus is very clear. It's about strengthening the defense industry across the EU, pushing for more joint procurement, buying equipment together, and building up collective capabilities faster. Their strategy seems to be about implementing things already agreed upon, things like the Rearm Europe plan and the White Paper for European Defense Readiness 2030. These are basically the blueprints for how the EU plans to boost its military readiness and its defense industrial base. Moving away from lots of separate national efforts towards something more integrated, the program actually states, quite directly, by 2030, the EU must be able to defend itself. And importantly, it adds, in complementarity with NATO.
So working alongside NATO, not against it.
Exactly. It's less about dreaming up new initiatives right now, and more about getting current ones over the line. Finishing the negotiations on the European Defense Industry Program, EDIG, is a big part of that. EDIP is really critical for boosting Europe's own ability to make and buy the defense kit it needs. And just to give you a sense of Denmark's own commitment, they're currently spending around 2.4% of their GDP on defense. That's a serious figure.
That really is a strong commitment, and it feels particularly interesting for Denmark, given their history, of sometimes being a bit Eurosceptic. But it seems like we're seeing a real pro-EU shift in Denmark now. What's driving that change?
That's a really important point, and the shift has been quite marked. The ORF analysis points to 2 big things. First, former U.S. President Trump's talk about annexing Greenland, which is, of course, Danish territory, albeit autonomous. And second, perhaps more significantly, Russia's war against Ukraine. These external shocks seem to have really reshaped how the Danish public and politicians view the EU.
So adapting to a harsher world, essentially.
Precisely. And we saw a very concrete sign of this adaptation just last month, actually, when Denmark left the Frugal Four group.
Ah, yes, the group set up in 2020 to keep EU spending down.
Exactly. Leaving that group isn't just about changing spending policy. It signals a deeper rethink about national interests versus collective security in the EU framework. Denmark, once known for being very careful with common funds, is now saying, look, the geopolitical threats mean we need a different kind of collective financial commitment. It might even pressure other frugal nations to reconsider. It's quite an evolution in how they see European integration.
That is a huge pivot.
Yeah.
So, okay, beyond defense and security, Denmark is also pushing for EU enlargement, right? Expanding the club. How does that ambition fit with well, the political realities, things like getting agreement on sanctions or actually integrating new members.
Yeah, enlargement is definitely a key priority listed in their program. They specifically mention wanting to advance the accession talks with Ukraine, Moldova, and the Western Balkan countries. Hand in hand with that comes continued support for Ukraine, which obviously includes keeping sanctions on Russia.
But that's not always easy, is it, getting all 27 members on the same page?
No, it isn't. And a big test for Denmark will be trying to get the 18th package of sanctions agreed upon. Right now, Hungary and Slovakia are reportedly opposing it. That really highlights the challenge of maintaining unity. Beyond enlargement itself, the Danish presidency also aims to deepen partnerships with countries outside the EU in the Gulf, Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean.
And I noticed a specific mention of the Indo-Pacific region in that context. That area is becoming increasingly important globally.
Yes, absolutely. The Danish program explicitly talks about, and I'm quoting here, an ambitious strategic agenda for EU-India relations, with a potential EU-India summit in 2025, serving as an important milestone. So clear focus on India within that broader Indo-Pacific strategy. But at the same time, the program also stresses the need for the EU to, quote, defend itself against unfair trade practices, dumping, and economic coercion from other actors.
So reaching out, but also protecting its own interests, a balancing act.
Very much so. It's about engagement and resilience in today's geoeconomic climate, crucial for a big bloc like the EU.
Okay, let's shift gears to the green transition. Denmark's got a strong reputation here, a leader in green tech, environmental innovation. How are they planning to use that leadership during their presidency, especially given, as we said, the challenge of getting everyone pulling in the same direction?
Right, this is definitely an area where Denmark wants to lead from the front. A major objective is getting agreement on the EU's 2040 climate target. That agreement needs to happen before the big COP28 climate conference in November this year. It's seen as essential for keeping the EU on track for climate neutrality by 2050.
And this comes after the Polish presidency, which was maybe a bit less focused on the green side.
Well, the Polish presidency had clear successes on security, but yes, perhaps showed a bit more ambiguity on the decarbonization goals.
Yeah.
For Denmark, even with their strong green credentials, getting all 27 member states aligned is still a huge challenge. You're talking about tricky issues like how to account for emissions reduction projects done outside the EU and third countries, and also dealing with continued resistance from some members like Hungary to phasing out Russian energy imports completely under the Repower EU plan.
Ah, yes, the plan to get off Russian fossil fuels quickly. Still facing hurdles then.
Still facing hurdles. Because, dependency is hard to break quickly, especially with existing infrastructure. But despite these difficulties, the Danish presidency also wants to push forward with implementing the Clean Industrial Deal that's about balancing green goals with competitiveness and starting talks on a new Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act. So it's a really packed green agenda, but one that will require a lot of diplomatic heavy lifting.
Absolutely. Balancing climate goals with economic realities seems key, which brings us neatly to competitiveness and another big issue, immigration. First, on the economy, what's Denmark's plan to boost resilience across the EU?
Well, on competitiveness, they plan to use existing tools like the Commission's Competitiveness Compass that helps pinpoint where improvements and investments are needed. Alongside that, there's a push to cut bureaucracy and red tape. They're planning these things called omnibus packages.
Omnibus packages
Yeah.
sounds broad.
It is. They're basically big pieces of legislation designed to simplify rules across lots of different areas at once. The aim is to make things easier for businesses, boost competitiveness, for example, maybe streamlining sustainability reporting requirements, making it less burdensome for companies. It's all about making the EU a more agile and attractive place for business and innovation.
Makes sense. And then immigration. This has been a really big domestic issue in Denmark, hasn't it? Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has taken quite a strict line. How is that likely to play out at the EU level during their presidency?
Indeed, and it really shows how national priorities can shape the EU agenda when a country holds the presidency. Copenhagen's approach at home is very likely to be reflected in their EU priorities. Their program talks about tackling migration through more cooperation with non-EU countries. It also mentions externalizing asylum processes,
Which means
essentially processing asylum claims outside the EU's borders, maybe those third countries they're cooperating with. It's a controversial idea, but when some EU states are exploring more seriously now, the idea is to manage flows before people arrive irregularly at EU borders. The program also mentions stricter border controls, stricter rules for asylum seekers, and even finding, quote, new and innovative ways to control irregular migration into the EU.
sounds quite firm.
It does. And it's not just talk. Back in May, Denmark was one of 9 EU countries calling for the European Convention on Human Rights to be reinterpreted when it comes to migrant protections. Part of the driver for this domestically is a big demographic shift in Denmark. The percentage of residents with foreign origins has jumped from about 3.3% in 1985 to a projected 16.3% this year, 2025. So you see that interplay between national concerns and EU-level policy ambitions very clearly on this issue.
Right. So bringing this all together for you, our listener, Denmark's EU presidency is clearly ambitious. We're seeing a strong focus on security, EU enlargement, the green transition, economic competitiveness, and a very distinct approach to migration. It really encapsulates that motto, a strong Europe in a changing world.
Absolutely. And the big underlying challenge for Denmark, like for any country holding the presidency, is going to be keeping all 27 member states together, maintaining that cohesion. Whether they can achieve that unity will really determine how successfully they can implement these priorities. And it's happening against, let's face it, a very complex and pretty turbulent global backdrop. Understanding these moving parts, the priorities, the challenges, the internal EU dynamics is so important if you're interested in global affairs. Especially, as we mentioned, if you're preparing for exams like UPSC and need to be on top of current events, or really if you just want to be a well-informed citizen.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. As Denmark pushes its ambitious agenda for a strong Europe in a changing world, how will the EU manage that crucial balancing act? Balancing its own internal cohesion, the often competing interests of its members, against the really urgent pressures of today's geopolitical and environmental landscape. That's the big question, isn't it? One that will likely define the next 6 months, and probably much longer, for the European Union. We really hope this deep dive has provided some valuable insights into what Denmark aims to achieve during its EU presidency. If you found this discussion useful, please do hit like, subscribe to the channel, and maybe drop a comment below if you have questions or thoughts. We genuinely enjoy hearing from you.